Good morning.
Good morning.
I said good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks to Don, Leslie, David, where are you? And John is, good. Did I say Joan? Well, I should have. And thank you for inviting me to be your teacher today. I do a lot of this sort of thing, but in no more pleasant venue than C3, pleasant and challenging in all the good ways. I'm a big fan, C3. I've been around for a time. I've made good friends here. Hope to keep them. And I say that because after what I'm about to say to you, this could be maybe the last time I talk here. I'm serious. A little history. When I first became acquainted with what is now C3, you were across the river, you were Christ Community Church. I was trying to figure out 12, 13 years ago, I think. And since then, as some of you know, I've been privileged to be asked back from time to time and always learn from it. During these years, I have been interested and I have witnessed the evolution of this community, from the big church in Spring Lake to what you now call the Sunday gathering, to the change of name. And by the way, it took me years, but when you were C3 Exchange, I said, what's with Exchange? Well, finally, I think John Leitner explained, that's the street that ran by the old church over there. I got it late in the game. I witnessed the departure of Dick Rem, the coming and the going of Ian Lawton, and the recent exit of Jennifer Atley Loudon. But meanwhile, in all of that, I have loved every opportunity you have given me to come here and talk with you, or over across the river in the beginning. And it really has made a great, shall I say, difference in my outlook about organized religion. But I'll bet you would agree with me that the human race would be safer if religion were a little less organized than it is. What do you think? Get a bunch of liberals together, they can't organize their way out of a paper bag, so you know what I'm talking about, and I'm one of them. But here's the main thing that still makes me curious about C3, and it's part of the tagline of your identification of yourself: West Michigan's inclusive spiritual connection. Well, nothing wrong with West Michigan, because that's where you are. That's what we're about as west in Michigan as we can get, unless you want to swim halfway across the big lake. And anything that connects people one to the other is a good thing. Connectedness is what our pastor calls connectedness. It's a wonderful word. And inclusive, well, inclusive is clearly an important message, whatever it turns out to mean. If you say you're inclusive and you act as if you are, well, that's a big deal, especially in an area in which religious communities are not necessarily always inclusive. The word in your tagline that puzzles me is spiritual, as the folks who came to the 9 o'clock spiritual inquiry found out. You know why that is? You know why the word spiritual and spirituality confound me? It's because I have no idea what either of them mean? Now, I'm a writer. I know a lot of words. I know several languages. I've spent almost, in fact, 49 years as of last Thursday as a priest. Come on, if I live to be 50, 79, I will have been a priest for 50 years, scholar of biblical text. So I've been part of the whole thing all this time, but I don't know what spirituality and spiritual mean. About 16 years ago, I was one of 11 speakers to talk at the biennial colloquium of the International Institute of Secular Humanist Judaism. And the Institute had chosen as its topic that year, this was its title, Secular Spirituality, a Passionate Journey to Rational Religion. What would they have done without adjectives? I was the only Gentile to speak, the only representative of Christian clergy. Guess why? There were two others who were rabbis, and each of the 11 of us had 1 hour to say our piece and have our say. Now, one speaker in particular turned to the question of whether one can be spiritual without God, or religion, and that kind of traditional thing. And he distinguished between what he called two types of spirituality. One he called mystical, the other he called natural. While mystical spirituality, he said, focuses on that which transcends the natural world to touch the world of God and the spirits. He said, a natural spirituality only recognizes what's part of the world. Now, as the weekend, it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday thing. As the weekend went on, you could sense the palpable concern in what was a very large crowd, paid money to get into this thing. I was speaker number 9, so I had to wait through 8 of these things. We're getting just more, doing this on the table in front of me. Finally, I was able to say that I was personally allergic to the term spirituality, and I denied the possibility of a logical connection between the word secular, meaning of this world, and the word spirituality, 9 times out of 10, meaning something that was sort of out of touch of human investigation, something approaching the supernatural, or at least something that could not really be judged and investigated. And I said furthermore, that it seemed odd to me that we would be talking about the supernatural, given that we had really not scratched much of what's natural yet. This was unfair, what I did next, but a good friend of mine in this place today said he would be surprised if I didn't shoot from the hip. So you may think this is a shot from the hip. These stories occur all the time. You read about them all the time. I had read a day or two before an Associated Press story about some mysterious circles that had appeared on a farm in western Kansas. And the reporter wrote this sentence. I have to read it to you. Quote, "The mysterious circles have been proven not to have been supernatural in origin." What? Once the laughter, lots better than your laughter, died down, I went on to say that just because a rational explanation of something is not or seems not to be immediately at hand doesn't mean that there isn't one somewhere up the line. We don't know everything. We hardly know anything. And I said in conclusion that I chose to name what other people called spirituality, quote, I use adjectives too, the passionate embrace of not knowing. The passionate embrace of not knowing. Like that, didn't you? When I finished that day, my colleagues on the dais were dazed. But the audience, I'm not bragging, I'm not telling you this to brag. I'll tell you in a minute why I am telling you this. The audience went crazy. They loved it. And after we recessed between me and the next person, man came up to me and said he'd waited all his adult life to hear something like I had said. So I said, as I said, I'm not telling you this because I was the best speaker there. It's because I hit the right note for him, at least, and a lot of other people. And I tell you because I worry in our, if I say business, you know what I mean, in our sort of world of religion, if you want to use that word. I worry about words such as spiritual and spirit because they appear to me to be, as it were, blank canvases spread on a frame, and people sort of paint on it whatever they think at a given time, which renders those words meaningless. Now, if you know anything about philosophy, I was sort of brought up as a logical positivist. How many of you know what logical positivism is? Okay, one guy. Well, it is, in short, it's now called language analysis. Does this word mean 1, 2, or 3? Or does it have any meaning at all? That's where I'm coming from with that. The key to my blast at that colloquium that day was the idea of not knowing, which in the philosophical world is known as agnosticism, which means I don't know. So I called it a passionate embrace of not knowing. And I would say that that's the emotion or the urge or the intellectual decision, maybe all three, that drives inquiry and also research. And they power the will to discover facts about things that explain whatever it is that needs explanation. Now, I did have critics that day at the colloquium. One lovely woman shook her finger at me. She said, "You deny emotion in religion." My rejoinder was that if by religion, ma'am, you mean unfiltered feeling without a basis in reason, you would be right in your activities. I had pointed out earlier that the phenomenon we call religion could not have been called that before the Latin language was invented. Because we get our word religion from a Latin word. I may have told you this before. I'm old, I repeat my good stories, so just nod your head and say, yes, good job, Harry. The noun is religare in Latin. And what it means is being willing, it's a sort of reflexive, being willing to be tied up or tied down. And what it really means is restraint. How many churches and denominations do you think practice restraint? You can find in any literature of any of the world's prominent religions many texts that begin as many of the mitzvot or commandments in Torah begin. Something like, thou shalt not. In other words, restrain thyself. Don't commit adultery. It's not nice. Honor your father and mother. Don't steal from people, all that stuff. What that was ethics and morality in the making. And every one of Torah's mitzvot is rooted in the collective intellect of the earliest patriarchs and matriarchs who figured out mitzvah by mitzvah how best to live, to structure a community with some kind of security within. It was a matter of human intellect and its application to human affairs having to do with the here and the now, not the then and the there. Got it? Nod your head if you got it. Well, then I will go on to my 127th point. So I will suggest to you that calling this marvelous community a spiritual connection may be a drawback in a way, because it puzzles people I know. They like words that have some degree of shared meaning. If I lived in Grand Haven, I would probably have to come here in self-defense, but I would be wondering what does the spiritual thing mean? But I'd probably come anyway, because what's the alternative, right? In this part of the country. And all this is about my affection and respect and hope for C3. I know a lot about your history. And I want you not only... That's all right. I'll get it when I need it. She'll get it for me. Because she knows when I need it. And the cane, too. I want you not only to endure, which is one thing, I want you to prevail. I would love to see this become not only a connection, and that's important, but a lighthouse that signals the message that this is a port toward which any sailor can sail his or her craft and drop anchor and be welcome, while we're talking about inclusive. Inclusive, indeed. Passionate, yes, please. Dedicated to this world, yes. Courageous enough to say who and what you think you are and are becoming, not necessarily what you are now or what you have been. Listen, I know a lot of churches. I know this is not a church, but we talk about going to church here. They struggle, some of these places, they struggle to keep on being what they already are, or worse, what they were once, instead of becoming what they could be. I want so much for you to let your light so shine before the world that the following thing will happen. When the position of, and perhaps it's happened already, but let's suppose it hasn't, the position of resident teacher, what Jennifer was, what Ian was, when it's advertised, that they'll come knocking down the door to get in. The best of them. Now that should be a really interesting job for a search committee that you may have, or they'll have to work day and night. I think I don't need to tell people who come here on Sunday morning that America is just desperate in needing progressive movements that respect learning and inquiry and never-ending pursuit of facts. And sorry to say, in our society, facts and all important nuances are orphaned. Empirical facts such as our mind through, what would you say, through analyzed data represent the truth of the thing as far as can be known as knowledge permits. Facts are not the enemy. They speak for themselves. You can take them or leave them. But I think it's always and ever the best way to go is to take them and struggle with them. The national debacle, which began on the evening of November 8th, 2016, was in large part due to unwillingness to struggle with nuance and fact-finding. And besides, our culture is a culture of sound bites, often enough devoid of facts. I mean, we tend well, not maybe we here, but we as a culture tend to fall for the one-liners. We're done. In the same way that the Greeks fell for the Iliad and the Odyssey. Have you plowed through either of those for a while? That's no soundbite. Or the Elizabethan audiences devoured Shakespeare's plays, each one with 5 long acts. Or the crowds in Wagner's Bayreuth Opera House sitting for 20 hours to take in Der Ring des Nibelungen, which is a very long time to be at the opera, much as I love it. Likewise, research and reasoning can't be done on the fly. Can't do it. And you can't, and their results can't be spelled out in Dick and Jane prose either. Despite the reality that a lot of people in this ADD age don't bother to read several page or even several paragraph analyses of anything. But boy, do they remember the forceful assertions that often does not have zero reason or facts behind them. Here's an example. Charles Darwin, from 22 years before 1859, in that time, he wrote his famous book on the origin of species. Now, he could have written this way and tweeted it. Human beings are descended from earthwards, the end. Have a nice day, you're done. A+ in the Biology 101. Instead, he wrote one of the classics of the English language, and it took him 480 pages to do it in a way that such non-scientists as I would actually be able to understand what he observed and what he concluded from what he observed. And that observer of life forms certainly did not tweet anything. Couldn't have been boiled down to 140. Is that the number? Ah, you tweet. Or a kind of a teaser to lure you to stay tuned to the 6 o'clock news. And while we're talking about Darwin, if he could give almost a third of his life to the development of the theory of natural selection, you and I can take a couple of 3 days to read his magnum opus. I'm not saying that we're all Darwins or all Einsteins, or should be. I'm saying that both of those intellectual giants and others like them set the standard for the discovery of truth and facts of the kind that help us understand the world around us and ourselves and the communities to which we belong. Their methodology of gathering, marshaling, and fitting together data into hypotheses produced the best explanation of whatever the phenomena and problems each was studying. And it all begins with what I call the challenge of not knowing. Now, their processes can work in any endeavor to learn the truth about anything. But it doesn't need to happen exclusively in a scientist's laboratory or a philosopher's study. It can happen anywhere where honest inquiry is made. including communities like this one, C3. Maybe especially with the freedom you have, self-governed. I dug out the notes of my 2001 lecture on secular spirituality. Actually, I was pretty easy on the term spirituality, as it turned out. I was perceived as not being very charitable about it, but I know what I said. One thing I said that seemed to be overlooked was spirituality might be better described as human ingenuity. Reaching out into the unknown in order to know. A kinetic exercise, not a passive one. I ended that lecture by saying that what some people insist on calling spirituality is really, finally, courage. In a world where guaranteed happy endings and magical stuff is fantasy. Well, as I said when I began, I may have taken the risk of not being asked to come back here. No. You don't have to listen to this if you don't want to. It's just advice from an old hand to a community that matters. I could be wrong. In fact, I have made a habit of that in my life. But I did this because I care. Because I believe in you, I believe in this community, and count on it to be here and to make a mark not only in Western Michigan, but everywhere. Because you know what? You not only have what it takes, you are what it takes. You are what it takes. Now, just a little bit from Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by. What's the next line? And that has made all the difference. Now, we're not to know what difference it made to Frost. We want to know what the difference would be if we went down or you went down the road. Listen, C3, listen to me. You want to make more of a difference than you already have? Take the road less traveled by. Do it with courage, which I insist is the real name of spirituality. To reach out and be a light in a considerable darkness of religious ignorance, confusion, and wrong-headedness. Be the community that embraces the passion of not knowing and then strive to know. You wouldn't be surprised, perhaps, to know how many of us are counting on you, seeing how far you've come just by crossing the river. Now, by the way, I love you one and all.